In the complex landscape of politics, the exclusion of certain groups from accessing and wielding power is not uncommon. Whether due to historical injustices, systemic biases, or deliberate marginalization, such exclusions have far-reaching implications for societal cohesion, representation, and progress. Understanding the dynamics behind how groups get locked out of political power is crucial for devising effective strategies to reverse these states and foster a more inclusive political environment. One prevalent dynamic is where the exclusion of a group from political power leads to disassociation between other groups, further reinforcing the exclusionary status quo. Young people often face disassociation from established political structures, leading to feelings of alienation and disenfranchisement. This disconnect can further perpetuate the exclusion of youth voices from decision-making processes. The exclusion of one group can sow seeds of division among others, deepening societal rifts and hindering collective progress. Exclusion of young people from political power can lead to divisions between generations, exacerbating tensions and hindering collaboration on issues of mutual concern. Exclusionary practices can lead to the fragmentation of societal groups, exacerbating social tensions and eroding trust. When young people are systematically excluded from political process, it can lead to the fragmentation of youth communities and erode trust in political institutions. Reversing this trend requires rebuilding trust through meaningful engagement, investing in youth-led initiatives, and creating avenues for young people to participate in decision-making at all levels of governance. The concentration of political power within certain groups can create bottlenecks limiting the participation of others and perpetuating exclusion. Breaking this bottleneck requires empowering marginalized groups and ensuring equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. Political power often remains concentrated within older generations, creating bottlenecks that limit young people's access to resources, opportunities, and representation. Breaking this bottleneck entails empowering young people through measures such as lowering the voting age and expanding youth representation in government. Finally, exclusion can give rise to feedback loops where the marginalization of one group reinforces itself over time. Disrupting these feedback loops requires proactive measures to amplify youth voices, address systemic barriers to political participation, and create inclusive spaces for youth engagement in decision-making processes. Understanding the dynamics of exclusion in politics is essential for crafting effective strategies to reverse these states and foster a more inclusive political landscape. By leveraging insights from triadic relationship models and other analytical frameworks, policymakers, activists, and stakeholders can work towards dismantling barriers to political participation and ensuring that all groups have a voice in shaping the future of society. Strikes and protests have historically served as powerful tools for advancing causes related to political inclusion, social justice, and empowerment, including addressing the exclusion of marginalized groups from political power. Examining their role through the lens of the triadic relationship model can provide insights into how these actions contribute to reversing dynamics of exclusion. First, strikes and protests often disrupt the status quo, bringing attention to issues of exclusion and inequality. By amplifying marginalized voices and challenging dominant narratives, these actions can foster dialogue and bridge the disassociation between different societal factions. For example, youth-led protests for climate action have spurred intergenerational dialogue and mobilized support for environmental policies. Second, mass mobilizations such as strikes and protests have the potential to unite diverse groups around shared grievances and aspirations. By fostering solidarity and collective action, these movements can transcend divisions between generations, races, genders, and socioeconomic classes. For instance, protests against police brutality and racial injustice have brought together people from various backgrounds to demand systemic reforms and social justice. Third, strikes and protests can counter the fragmentation of marginalized communities by providing platforms for collective organizing and resistance. Through inclusive participation and solidarity-building activities such as marches, rallies, and sit-ins, these actions can rebuild trust and cohesion among disenfranchised groups. For example, protests advocating for LGBTQ+ rights have helped create cohesive movements and advance legal protections for marginalized communities. Fourth, by disrupting power structures and challenging hierarchical systems, strikes and protests can break bottlenecks that limit access to political power and resources. These actions empower marginalized groups to demand representation, rights, and reforms that address their needs and interests. For instance, labor strikes have historically led to improvements in working conditions, wages, and labor rights, benefiting workers across various sectors. Finally, strikes and protests serve as catalysts for change by amplifying marginalized voices and pressuring decision makers to address systemic injustices. Through sustained mobilization and advocacy efforts, these actions can disrupt feedback loops of marginalization and promote inclusive policies and institutional reforms. For example, student-led protests for gun control have sparked legislative action and policy changes aimed at preventing gun violence and protecting communities. In summary, strikes and protests play a crucial role in advancing causes related to political inclusion, social justice, and empowerment by challenging exclusionary dynamics, fostering solidarity, rebuilding trust, breaking bottlenecks, and disrupting feedback loops of marginalization. Consider the profound impact of the civil rights movement in the United States during the 1950s and 1960s. This era marked a significant chapter in the history of mass mobilizations influencing political change. The collective actions of thousands, from the Montgomery bus boycott to the March on Washington, were not just demonstrations of dissent. They were catalysts for legislative milestones such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These laws fundamentally transformed American society, making it more equitable by dismantling institutional racial segregation and ensuring voting rights for all citizens, regardless of color. What these movements teach us is the undeniable power of collective action. When citizens unite, their voices become too loud to ignore. This unity forces those in power to listen, and more importantly, to act. The civil rights movement's success lay not just in its ability to mobilize individuals around a common cause, but in its capacity to sustain that mobilization, turning fleeting moments of activism into a powerful, enduring campaign for justice and equality. The lessons we derive from these movements are clear. Youth empowerment through mass mobilization can reshape our societies. Young people possess the creativity, the passion, and the technological savviness to lead campaigns that address the most pressing issues of their times, from climate change to social justice. Fellow citizens, today we stand at a crossroads in history. Across nations, we witness escalating international conflicts that threaten global peace and the deepening crisis of economic inequality that undermines the very fabric of our societies. These challenges are vast, but not invincible. They demand a response as bold and as inclusive as the problems are broad and interconnected. It is for this reason that I call upon every worker, every student, every mother, every father, every person who dreams of a just and equitable world to join in a general strike across all industries. Imagine the power of millions united not just in purpose but in action. A general strike, a global stand down where every industry pauses. Not out of weakness, but as the ultimate display of our collective strength. This is our moment to demand an end to wars that ravage our planet and to insist on policies that bridge the gap between the obscenely wealthy and the unjustly impoverished. Let this strike be our declaration that we will no longer tolerate the status quo of conflict and inequality. Let it be our rallying cry that we demand peace, not just the absence of war, but a peace that comes with the security of economic justice. Let us show that when we stand together, when we demand change together, when we pause the very wheels of the industries that depend on us, the world must listen. To those who say it cannot be done, let us remind them of the power of united voices and concerted actions. The history of change was never written by those who said it cannot be done, but by those who did it. This is our time to shape the future. Saparteici, a future of peace, equality, and dignity for all. Join us as we strike for peace. Join us as we strike for justice. Together, we are unstoppable.